The planet is on a healing path from coronavirus. Vaccination against COVID-19 has begun around the world. The best virologists promise to bring people back to normal reality. What's happening now in different countries? Where quarantine has become a way of life? When can we breathe again without masks? All this in the Stop COVID program. Two main issues are being discussed around the world this spring: increasing the production and supply of vaccines against COVID-19 and the creation of so-called COVID passports. All recent meetings of the EU Commission are also dedicated to these topics. It's already known that a document confirming the vaccination will still be developed, although it will appear not earlier than summer. Greece, Spain, and Italy were the most in favor of the development. Last year's summer season turned into a real disaster for the countries. France and Germany are on opposing side. A certificate instead of security will only provide discrimination among tourists. The WHO has already expressed its opinion. COVID passports should not be the decisive document for the movement of people. In addition, the long-term effect of the vaccine is still unproven. In any case, European countries promise not to close their borders to travelers without a new document. Still, people will have to provide negative PCR tests. In the homeland of the coronavirus, China, vaccination already plays a key role in the life of society. For example, cafes and restaurants have acquired a special sign of vaccinated personnel. The population in the Celestial Empire is vaccinated faster than anywhere else. However, the campaign will end probably later than in any other countries due to the large population. Correspondent Batagosa Sergabayeva will share the latest news from China. In January, another outbreak of coronavirus occurred in China. It affected several regions at once, including Beijing and the surrounding Hebei province. China is a country with a population of about 1.5 billion people, so in order to contain the wave of infections, the most stringent measures are taking place. For example, in case of isolated local cases, a residential building or a whole block is immediately closed. Relatives of patients and everyone who came into contact with an infected person are quarantined. Individuals who are isolated are tested 3-4 times to make sure they have not been infected. And if the number of patients continues to grow, then the whole city is closed. And then all residents of the settlement are checked for the presence of the virus several times. In China, only imported cases are now being recorded, but even in such a situation, one cannot get into public places without masks. And everywhere they demand to provide personal data. This is mainly done using the Health Kit or Health Code application. It is updated regularly. For example, information about taking a COVID-19 test. Vaccination data may also be included in this app. In China, they began to vaccinate against coronavirus since last year. To date, 4 drugs have already been approved for market use. 3 vaccines are inactivated. What does this mean? This type of vaccine is produced on the basis of neutralized viral particles. It is a drug with a killed virus. In order for immunity to arise, 2 doses must be administered. The technology for the production of inactivated vaccine is generally already established. It's more classical. Each of us has already received such a vaccine. Of course, now we're dealing with a new virus. But in general, the technology itself, I think, is reliable. But the 4th vaccine is a recombinant vector vaccine. 1 dose is enough for the formation of antibodies. Among all the vaccines approved for market in the country, our drug is the only one that needs to be administered only once with a single vaccination. Both cellular and humoral immunity will be activated in the human body. Effective immune protection will be developed already after 14 days. In addition, this vaccine can be transported and stored at temperatures between 2 and 8 degrees above zero. The authorities have already announced that by the end of this year, they can produce up to 2 billion doses of vaccines. Next year, 2 times more. First key populations were vaccinated. These are doctors, customs officers, all those who work with imported goods and frozen products, police officers, and firefighters. In Beijing, the list also included taxi drivers, mail couriers, and people who deliver food. Other categories of citizens are being actively vaccinated now. So far, the main recipients of the vaccine are residents aged 18 and over. The drug manufacturers hope that they will soon receive permission to vaccinate children from 3 to 17 years old.
3到17岁
The oldest vaccinated person is almost 100 years old. Clinical trials on children aged 3 to 17 did not show much difference from people aged 18 to 59. I think that citizens from 3 to 17 years old will also be allowed to be vaccinated soon. More than 3.5 million people have already been vaccinated in Beijing. You can queue up and register for vaccinations online. However, this is not yet possible for foreigners. We asked the residents themselves about how active they are about vaccination.
对，打过了，已经2个。
I've already taken the first vaccine. Everything is fine. I will receive the next dose in a month.
是3月20多号，22号。
疫苗我还没有打，还没有接种。
I have not yet been vaccinated. I have a chronic illness, but if I leave Beijing or travel abroad, I will definitely get vaccinated.
我暂时再考虑考虑。
Recently, such signs have appeared at the entrance of some restaurants and cafes. They mean that the staff was vaccinated against the coronavirus. And by the way, public places after the pandemic began to use more robotic labor.
Труд роботов.
For example, for disinfecting and serving food, it's convenient and safe for staff. After all, this minimizes direct contact. Ordering food and paying through the app also became common in restaurants after the outbreak of the pandemic. In the middle of last month, China celebrated the Lunar New Year. Both adults and children had time to relax, although this year many did not dare to leave the city. Therefore, Beijing was unusually lively. On March 1st, the children began a new academic semester. Before returning to school, they had to take a coronavirus test. In the Netherlands, the second wave of the pandemic hit the country in September. Then they gradually began to introduce restrictive measures. They closed entertainment centers, the cafes, and restaurants. However, this did not affect the dynamics of infections in any way. The numbers still rose, as well as the resentment of the Dutch themselves. As a result, strict quarantine measures ended with rallies and court proceedings. The Dutch have filed a lawsuit against their own government. The curfew was considered as a violation of freedom and infringement on the highest value of a person. The Hague court considered the complaint fair and ruled against the authorities. However, a day later, the laws of Holland were amended. The curfew was not cancelled. It is in effect to this day. It all started with the closure of all entertainment centers, museums, cinemas, and theaters. This was followed by catering points. Restaurants, cafes, bars were all completely and still completely closed. They work only for delivery and takeaway. But life also went on. Everyone socialized here. And these measures did not cause a decrease in the incidents. And the government decided to impose a ban on shopping. The shopping center is completely closed. All boutiques are closed. Only a supermarket is open. This is a red light district. It's empty, with no tourists. Since December, all shops have been closed except for grocery and pharmacies. This caused a lot of negative emotions among the local population, since these were pre-holiday, pre-Christmas, pre-New Year days. There was no opportunity to buy anything, and the delivery did not work. A bold point, a surge of emotions, was the introduction of a curfew from January. We still have a curfew from 9 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. This caused a lot of protests and rallies in all cities in the Netherlands, including the use of weapons and fire. Such a situation has been seen in the kingdom only in the last century.
Такую ситуацию в королевстве видели только в прошлом столетии.
Это, наверное, самая большая площадь Амстердама.
буквально пару...
This is probably the largest square in Amsterdam. Just a couple of weeks ago, it was full of people. Everyone went to rallies against the curfew, which was from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m.
5 часов вечера до 4 часов утра. Митинги дали свои плоды.
The rallies bore fruit. The Hague Court lifted the curfew, but on the same evening, the government of the country filed an appeal and amended the current law. The amendments state that the government can now impose a curfew at its discretion.
Закон. Поправки сейчас гласят, что правительство может по своему усмотрению вводить комендантский час.
As in other European countries, in Holland, employees are transferred to work online whenever possible. Universities also study online, but school and kindergartens work in the usual mode.
Это территория школы. Сейчас здесь пусто, потому что сейчас у детей каникулы.
This is the school grounds. It's empty now because the kids are on vacation. Now parents are not allowed into the school building. Children from different classes are divided in time. Someone comes at 8:30, someone at 8:45. They are picked up from school in their individually assigned time.
8:45 и забирают их также по времени.
Many Dutch people, and Joly among them, admit it was very difficult to work when schools were quarantined. Children disrupted all telephone conversations. It was very difficult to concentrate. It's hard without traveling too, especially home to Kazakhstan. Julia, with her Dutch husband and pet Ozzy, live far from the city noise, but also in Holland. The girl says that the pandemic hit hard morally, but not financially. It's just that all the work, Julia teaches English and Dutch, had to be moved into online format. This is very depressing. You of course get used to it, but it's very depressing, and everyone is waiting. They can't wait when it will be possible to sit in a cafe and go to the store shopping. But now we only have grocery stores open. Since March, the government has decided to ease quarantine measures and open all stores. However, it's still prohibited to come on a first-come, first-served basis. At each store, shoppers must register online and book the time for their visit.
But
this is so strange. You sign up, for example, to a clothing store and you are given 10 minutes to shop. For me, this is absurd.
Пошопиться. Но для меня это какой-то абсурд.
Самая главная сложность, с чем мы столкнулись, это...
The main difficulty we faced was the closure of the borders of Kazakhstan with the Kingdom of the Netherlands. We still cannot get visas for our parents, brothers and sisters. Those who study and work can communicate via phone. They can see their loved ones only by video calls. This, of course, affects our emotional state. We, one might say, are isolated in four walls. We don't see anyone, but we believe in hope for the best.
Не видим никого, но мы верим в лучшее, надеемся на лучшее.
In Canada, too, the number of disgruntled residents is growing. Only people there are angry about the pace of vaccination. Last year, the country bought a record number of doses per capita. For 38 million, the government has booked 10 times more of a drug, 400 million doses. However, the population is being vaccinated extremely slow. To date, only 3% of Canadians have received their vaccines. To accelerate the pace of the health campaign and address supply delays, a third manufacturer has been approved in the country. A few days ago, 20 million doses of the British-Swedish vaccine were delivered to Canada.
Если первую волну весеннюю удалось как-то сдержать, то...
In the first wave of the spring was somehow contained, then the second one, the fall-winter one, was much stronger. The number of cases in the fall and even now far exceeds what it was in the spring. This was partly due to the fact that despite requests from the authorities, many people still went to celebrate Christmas and New Year to their acquaintances or to their friends.
Пошли отмечать Рождество и Новый год либо к своим знакомым, либо к друзьям.
To date, more than 700,000 Canadians have had the coronavirus. Nursing homes were hit the hardest. The most vulnerable group of the population was infected at the same time. The bulk of the deaths, about 70%, also occurred among seniors.
Многие очень ответственно.
Many people are very responsible about wearing a mask and social distance. Even when you're walking on the street, people try to keep their distance. They behave very responsibly in stores, trying to keep their distance.
Стараясь соблюдать дистанцию.
For the 5th month now, Toronto has been living in the complete isolation. Restaurants, cafes, gyms are closed. It's impossible to leave the house for no reason. The city's once crowded streets are now more like a ghost town. Most of the population works from home. Since the quarantine has been going on for probably the 5th month, I had to order this exercise bike for myself. This is how we save ourselves in the breaks between work in the evening and in the morning. Isolation is difficult for Dmitry from Toronto, but he does not lose heart. For the health of his body, he has an exercise bike in his apartment, and for the health of his soul, a little fluffy friend. More precisely, girlfriend Elsa. Finding a kitten in the pandemic turned out to be a very difficult task. In Canada, at the time of the pandemic, the demand for pets, all kinds of dogs and cats, increased sharply. Every 9th resident in Toronto has some kind of pet. The demand for them only started to grow. Elsa has a stunning view of Toronto in her new house. She's brushed twice a week, played with, fed from China, and is very much loved. The breeders brought the kitten to Dmitry themselves from another city. They handed it over strictly in masks, observing all sanitary standards. Almost immediately, Elsa received a chip under her skin and her own number. This is how they track and find pets in Canada in case they are lost. This is how we play during the workday. She gets up like this and we play. Remote work was not possible for all professions. An estimated 200,000 people have lost their jobs since the start of the pandemic. They, as well as small businesses, which had to be temporarily paused, are actively supported by social benefits.
В целом государство старается поддержать население и бизнес.
In general, the state is trying to support the population and business. There are a lot of different types of financial assistance allocated to cover at least a partial rent, to cover the salaries of employees, for operating expenses and many other things. When I arrived in Toronto, it was very difficult to find an apartment here. All the apartments were very expensive. Now it has turned out that the rental housing market has dropped by almost 20%, and so the cost went down. But at the same time, a lot of people left Toronto because there was less work and unemployment increased. At the same time, if you work remotely, you can live in some less expensive part of the province, but still earn the same amount of money. The rental housing market is projected to recover only by 2022. In the meantime, young people and students often return to live in their parental home. Returning to Canada itself, if you had to leave the country, is now problematic and expensive. There are certain requirements, sanitary standards that will need to be observed. For example, upon arrival in the country, you need to spend 3 days in a special hotel, which will cost about 2,000 Canadian dollars per person. This includes food and the cost of the staff who will look after you. The border with the United States remains closed. In addition, now Canadians cannot fly to their favorite Caribbean resorts. Airlines have suspended flights after a scandalous incident when local MPs flew there on Christmas, despite the fact that the government urged not to leave even your own apartments.
У нас в Ванкувере достаточно все расслаблено, люди гуляют, очень много на улицах.
In Vancouver, everything is quite relaxed. People walk a lot on the streets. For example, in British Columbia, later than in other provinces, they introduced the requirement to wear masks indoors, in shops, transport, and so on. Bars, restaurants are still open here, and fitness centers have never been closed.
Фитнес-центры, в отличие, например, от таких провинций, как Онтарио или Quebec.
In other parts of Canada, different rules apply. Of the usual coronavirus bans, there is only a ban on mass meetings. They ask to be in contact only with those who live with you in the same place.
С декабря начали ставить первые вакцины, пока их получают только пожилые люди.
Since December, the first vaccines have been delivered. So far, they are received by the elderly, including those at nursing homes and medical professionals. But it's planned that a large-scale vaccination will begin in April-May. They will equip a special room for this.
Широкомасштабная вакцинация, уже оборудуют специальное помещение для этого.
Mass vaccinations are scheduled to begin in Canada in April and be completed by September. So far, they plan to vaccinate voluntarily, but several times the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health have stated that the availability of the vaccine will have a great effect on the future life.